When a ship sinks beneath the waves, it sometimes takes more than just lives and cargo. It takes evidence. Beyond the immediate tragedy, some maritime disasters have revealed darker truths: criminal negligence, deliberate fraud, and in some cases, potential cover-ups. In this video, we'll investigate 3 shipwrecks where the search for answers led investigators down unexpected and troubling paths. Welcome to Shipwreck History. The MS Estonia was one of the largest and most prestigious passenger ferries operating in the Baltic Sea during the early 1990s. At nearly 510 feet long, the vessel could carry over 2,000 passengers and crew between Stockholm, Sweden and Tallinn, Estonia. Built in 1980 for a Finnish shipping company, the Estonia had changed ownership several times before becoming the maritime flagship of newly independent Estonia in 1993. On September 27, 1994, the Estonia departed Tallinn harbor for an overnight crossing to Stockholm with 989 people aboard. Weather conditions were deteriorating, with strong wind and waves reaching up to 20 feet. Most passengers settled into their cabins as the ferry pushed through the increasingly rough Baltic Sea. Shortly after midnight, passengers reported hearing unusual metallic banging sounds coming from the bow. These noises were likely the massive bow visor, a 55-ton steel door at the front of the ship, used for loading vehicles, straining against its locks in the heavy seas. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the visor completely tore away from the hull, pulling open the ship's inner ramp and allowing waves to surge directly onto the vehicle deck. Within minutes, the situation deteriorated rapidly as tons of seawater flooded the car deck. The Estonia began listing severely to starboard, eventually reaching a devastating 60-degree angle that made movement inside the vessel nearly impossible. As water breached watertight compartments, the ship's public address system remained silent, with no evacuation orders issued. Many passengers were awakened by the listing or by fellow travelers pounding on cabin doors. Some crew members attempted to assist passengers, while others reportedly focused on saving themselves. The rapid flooding prevented the launch of many lifeboats, and the severe list made reaching the life rafts extremely difficult. In less than 45 minutes, the Estonia capsized and sank beneath the waves. Of the 989 people aboard, only 137 survived, most rescued by helicopter, after spending hours in the frigid water. The official investigation, conducted jointly by Estonia, Finland, and Sweden, concluded that it was the ship's bow visor alone that had failed in the heavy seas, as the massive metal door had torn off entirely. According to the official report, poor maintenance and design flaws in the locking mechanism caused the catastrophic failure. But almost immediately, survivors and independent investigators began questioning this explanation. Several survivors reported hearing explosion-like sounds before the ship began listing. Others described unusual activity in the ship's cargo area before departure. These accounts fueled speculation about what the Estonia might have been carrying on its final voyage. Strange developments continued to mount. Within months of the sinking, Sweden declared the wreck's site a protected grave, making it illegal to dive to the Estonia. No bodies were recovered from inside the vessel, despite technology existing to safely conduct such operations. Officials cited technical difficulties and risks, though experts argued it would have been possible. Former high-ranking Soviet and Estonian officials later claimed the ferry had been used to transport military intelligence equipment and possibly components for missile systems from the former Soviet Union to Western intelligence agencies. Some alleged the ferry had been under surveillance by several intelligence services on the night it sank. However, no definitive evidence has confirmed these allegations. The most explosive development came in 2020, when a documentary team using a remote submersible discovered a previously undocumented 4-meter hole in the Estonia's hull, something never mentioned in the official investigation report. The finding directly contradicted the bow visor failure theory, suggesting the ship may have collided with an object or suffered an explosion. Swedish prosecutors launched a new preliminary investigation based on this evidence, though critics noted its narrow scope focused only on whether the hole was present before or after the sinking, not on wider questions about the disaster's cause or potential cover-up. Adding to the controversy, multiple journalists investigating the Estonia case allegedly reported intimidation, with some claiming government agencies confiscated their evidence and research materials. Documents related to the disaster were classified for unusual lengths of time, and there were also allegations that some survivors were pressured to align their testimonies with the official narrative. While the truth about what happened to the Estonia remains contested, the disaster did force significant changes in maritime safety. The International Maritime Organization implemented stricter stability requirements for passenger vessels, mandated improved evacuation systems, and required better monitoring of bow door mechanisms. These Estonia regulations have likely prevented similar disasters, but for many survivors and victims' families, these improvements provide little consolation without full transparency about what really happened that night in the Baltic Sea. Whether criminal negligence or deliberate acts contributed to the disaster remains unresolved, leaving the Estonia case in a troubling gray area between accident and potential wrongdoing. The Philippines, a nation of over 7,000 islands, depends on an extensive ferry system to connect its widespread population. In the 1980s, the system was notorious for overcrowded vessels, minimal safety standards, and virtually non-existent regulatory enforcement. Among these ferries was the Dona Paz, a 2,000-ton passenger vessel originally built in Japan in 1963 and later acquired by Philippine shipping company Sulpicio Lines. On December 20, 1987, the Dona Paz departed the island of Leyte, bound for Manila, carrying passengers heading home for Christmas celebrations. The vessel was designed to hold 1,518 passengers and was operating on an exceptionally busy holiday route. As darkness fell, the ferry sailed through the Tablas Strait, a busy shipping channel between Mindoro and Marinduque Islands. Around midnight, the Dona Paz collided with the MV Vector, an oil tanker carrying 8,800 barrels of gasoline and other petroleum products. The impact ruptured the Vector's cargo holds, engulfing both vessels in flames within minutes. Survivors described the sea itself catching fire as petroleum products spread across the water's surface, creating an inescapable ring of fire around the sinking vessels. Most passengers were asleep when the collision occurred, trapped in the ferry's interior with no warning and no guidance from crew. What followed was the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. Of the estimated 4,386 people aboard the Dona Paz, only 24 survived, most rescued by passing vessels rather than through any organized response. It took 8 hours for Philippine authorities to learn about the disaster, and search efforts didn't begin until morning. The criminal investigation that followed revealed a catalog of negligence, corruption, and fraud that had turned the Dona Paz into a floating death trap. The official manifest listed only 1,583 passengers and 58 crew members, less than half the actual number aboard. Ticket collectors had allowed hundreds of passengers to board without documentation, pocketing the cash payments and creating no record of their presence. Physical examination of the wreckage exposed critical safety deficiencies. The Dona Paz had no radio equipment to call for help. Fire extinguishers were empty or missing entirely. Life jackets were insufficient for even the official passenger count, let alone the actual number aboard. Most damning was the revelation that the ship's officers were underqualified, with some crew members lacking any maritime training at all. The investigation widened to reveal systemic corruption throughout the Philippine maritime industry. Safety inspectors routinely accepted bribes to certify unseaworthy vessels. The Philippine Coast Guard, responsible for enforcing maritime regulations, was found to have conducted no actual inspections of the Dona Paz for years before the disaster, despite issuing paperwork claiming otherwise. Investigators discovered that multiple safety violations had been documented and then deliberately ignored by regulatory authorities. The MV Vector's operating condition proved equally shocking. The tanker was operating without a license, proper lights, or a qualified captain. Its owner had been using falsified documents to operate the vessel despite known structural defects. Accountability proved elusive despite the scale of the tragedy. Sulpicio Lines, the Dona Paz's operator, used legal maneuvering to limit compensation to victims' families to approximately $4,000 per person. Despite facing criminal negligence charges, Company executives eventually avoided significant punishment through a combination of legal delays and political connections. The Vector's owners faced similar charges, but likewise escaped meaningful consequences. The disaster did force some changes in Philippine maritime regulations, including stricter passenger manifesting requirements and increased inspection frequency. However, critics note that enforcement remains problematic, with corruption continuing to undermine safety standards. Subsequent disasters involving other Sulpicio Line's vessels, including the 2008 sinking of the Princess of the Stars, with over 800 casualties, suggest the lessons of the Dona Paz were never fully implemented. For thousands of Filipino families who never recovered their loved ones' remains, the Dona Paz represents not just a maritime disaster, but a criminal failure of corporate responsibility and government oversight, where justice remains elusive decades later. The MV Derbyshire was a maritime giant, at 965 feet long and nearly 170,000 tons. She was the largest British merchant vessel of her time. Classified as a bulk oil carrier, this mammoth ship was designed to transport massive cargo loads across the world's oceans. Built in 1976 by Swan Hunter shipbuilders, the Derbyshire represented the pinnacle of British shipbuilding technology and was considered virtually unsinkable due to her size and modern design. In September 1980, the Derbyshire was transporting over 150,000 tons of iron ore from Canada to Japan when she encountered Typhoon Orchid in the South China Sea. On September 9th, all communication with the vessel suddenly ceased. There was no distress call, no mayday signal. The Derbyshire and her crew members simply vanished without a trace. When the vessel failed to arrive at its scheduled destination in Japan, it was reported missing. At this point, Japanese and British authorities launched search operations in the South China Sea, in the general area where the vessel was believed to have encountered Typhoon Orchid. This initial search found some floating debris but no survivors or definitive wreckage that could confirm what happened to the ship. The disappearance of such a massive modern vessel without warning shocked the maritime community worldwide. The initial investigation, conducted by the British Department of Transport, had to rely on circumstantial evidence, weather data, and analysis of sister ships. They reached a swift and convenient conclusion. The crew must have failed to secure hatches properly, allowing water to flood the holds. This finding effectively blamed the missing crew for their own deaths, suggesting that human error, rather than any design flaw, was to blame for the sinking. The wreckage of the Derbyshire wasn't located until 1994 during a search expedition, which was later followed by the more comprehensive survey of the wreck's site in 1997. The significant time gap between the disappearance and finding the wreck allowed incorrect theories to persist. The families of the lost crew refused to accept this explanation. Led by Paul Lambert, whose brother Peter had been the Derbyshire's electrical officer, they formed the Derbyshire Family Association and began a relentless campaign for a proper investigation. What followed was a two-decade battle against powerful shipping interests, insurance companies, and government reluctance. The breakthrough came in 1986 when the families discovered that several sister ships of the Derbyshire had developed serious structural problems. The Liverpool Echo newspaper published photographs of the MV Time Bridge, a vessel from the same fleet with identical design, showing massive cracks in its structure. This evidence directly contradicted claims about the Derbyshire's supposedly flawless design. Further investigation uncovered troubling irregularities in the Derbyshire's certification and maintenance records. Documents that should have shown crucial structural inspections appeared to have been completed after the ship had already left port. Other maintenance records contained signatures from inspectors who were provably elsewhere on the dates in question, clear evidence of falsification. The most damning evidence emerged during the comprehensive wreck survey in 1997. Using advanced underwater vehicles, investigators photographed and mapped over 135,000 images of the wreckage. The evidence was conclusive. The Derbyshire had not sunk because of crew error. Instead, structural failure around the ship's forward ventilation system had allowed seawater to flood the forward spaces, causing the vessel to pitch downward and break apart under the enormous pressure. Records revealed that shipbuilders and classification societies had been aware of potential problems with these designs, but had concealed these concerns to avoid costly modifications to existing vessels. The family's persistence ultimately forced a formal reopening of the investigation in 2000. The new assessment concluded that the sinking resulted from inherent structural weaknesses rather than any action by the crew. This vindication came 20 years after the disaster, but it finally cleared the crew of any blame for the sinking. Jurisdictional complexities, difficulties in establishing direct personal responsibility for specific documents, and changes in corporate structures over the intervening decades prevented any formal criminal charges from being filed. For the shipping industry, the case exposed the dangerous practice of falsifying safety records and concealing known design flaws. For the families, the two-decade fight revealed how corporate interests had prioritized profit over human life, and how easily official investigations could be influenced to protect those interests rather than uncover truth. These three maritime disasters, spanning continents and decades, revealed disturbing patterns in how truth can be buried at sea. When powerful interests control the narrative, initial investigations often produce convenient explanations that protect reputations and limit liability. Without persistent questioning from families, journalists, and independent investigators, the real stories might never have emerged. These cases forever changed how maritime disasters are investigated. Advanced underwater imaging technology, improved wreckage analysis techniques, and more transparent international cooperation now make it harder for criminal negligence to hide behind convenient explanations. Yet accountability remains elusive. Corporate structures dissolve, evidence deteriorates, and jurisdictional complexities allow responsible parties to evade justice. The most crucial lesson these cases teach is that official narratives deserve scrutiny. The families who fought for decades, the journalists who faced intimidation, and the independent experts who challenged authority all played essential roles in uncovering truths that might otherwise remain lost at sea. Their persistence ensured that these disasters led to meaningful safety improvements rather than becoming forgotten tragedies. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share. It goes a long way in helping us grow our channel. Let us know in the comments what you think about these stories and what shipwrecks you want us to cover next. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell to get notified when we release new videos. Until next time, keep exploring.